everyone, I'm Ruth Kelly. I'm now Senior Fellow at Policy Exchange. I've had the privilege of working closely with Dame Rachel de Souza in the past, so I am absolutely delighted to be able to welcome her here to give a keynote address this morning. Rachel has been incredibly influential in the education and now children's world. Rachel was one of the very first Academy sponsor heads, and then she went on to set up a leading multi-academy trust, the Inspiration Trust, with 14 schools, and ran that before becoming Children's Commissioner. And it really is great to have an educationalist who has that front-hand knowledge of working with children in so many different settings now as Children's Commissioner. So it's a really, really great honour for us to have you today, Dame Rachel. I just wanted to say something on my own account about families and children, actually. So when I was a government minister, which I was for many years, families weren't really talked about. In fact, children were talked about, but often in a way designed to avoid talking about families. What I think Rachel is so powerfully doing is making clear that children's voices need to be heard and that they are putting family centre stage again. In fact, in all of my time as a minister, while there were many, many attempts to prioritise the needs of women, of parents, of thinking about getting employment levels higher and so forth, there wasn't much talk about relationships and about care and about the loving environment that children need to grow up in. So I'm already saying congratulations, Rachel, before we hear you speak today, but I think your attempts to put families as well as children centre stage is long overdue and really welcome. So welcome to Policy Exchange today. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. I think you're going to speak for about 20 minutes and then I'm going to open the floor up to questions. You have some slides, I believe, too. I know we have a very large online audience for today's event too. If you're online and you want to ask a question, please do raise your virtual hand. And there will be someone in the background sort of trying to manage that logistically so that that will be flagged up to me when we come to take questions. But also please prepare your questions from the floor as well. So over to you, Dame Rachel, welcome.
Thank you so much, Ruth. Okay. And just before I start, it was so wonderful to be introduced by Ruth. When I was a young teacher learning my craft and actually bouncing my newborn son on my knee, Ruth was our education secretary and I admired her from afar. In the past couple of years, we've had a chance to become friends and colleagues. And I think something that's you wouldn't know by looking in terms of we're literally born the same year, 2 months between us. So we're 1968 babies. And we've lived the lives of those that late 60s births, where opportunities for women and change in families has just been, exponential. And so I think it's really appropriate that we're both here, passionately committed to family and to children, standing on the same platform and absolutely committed to taking forward those issues and dedicating ourselves to that. So it's great to be here. And just before I start, I also want to thank my team. As soon as I saw the leadership campaign, I cancelled holiday for my team because I felt we needed to be giving the new Prime Minister a real lowdown on what family is like and what family need in Britain today. So thank you to my team, and particularly Stephanie Calhoun, who's at the back. Where is she? Give us a wave, Steph, who is our fantastic analyst. And if you have any questions about the very, very detailed, deep and broad evidence base, she's a person to speak to. But let's press on. So thank you for having me, and I'm so excited to be here today to launch my independent family review. The genesis was the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities work. We were commissioned to do this by government, by Kemi Badenoch. There was a need to understand families in modern England. Now, I want to move us away from focusing solely on formation and measuring households towards the relationship and fundamentals of family, which Ruth has alluded to. As Children's Commissioner, I want children, I want their views, voices, experiences and rights to be absolutely at the heart of this work. So when government commissioned me in my office to do just that, I didn't think twice. Policymakers, decision takers need to understand how families speak about themselves, who is in the family unit, and what families want. Family is fundamental, and we've become too shy about speaking about just how important it is to us all. If we want to create stronger, happier future generations, we must start with the family. If we can get the family right, I truly believe everything else can flow from there. Family was one of my top priorities when I came into role because it's children's priority. And that's why I'm delighted to be launching part 1 of my family review here today. So, as Ruth said, I've been working in education for over 30 years. And I absolutely have dedicated my career to the belief that education can transform children's lives, transform their outcomes and transform their success later on in life. And that's why I dedicated my career to it. I believe the only other factor that's anywhere near, and in fact is probably even more important than education, that has the same or even more of a transformative effect is family. Now, I believe this instinctively because of my own background and my experience in the classroom, but it's not just my view. It's what children have told me, 500,000 of them. When I took up this post, I asked children about their hopes, their dreams, what was important to them, and I did hope family would be on the list. But I was surprised just how important it was for them. Children in our largest ever survey of their views, the Big Ask, told me how central family was to their lives, about how having their own family was a priority, and especially those for whom home was difficult. Where children were unhappy with their family, they were 9 times more likely to be unhappy in general. And my research today will show just how much family matters. When families invest in themselves and spend quality time with each other, children and parents' well-being is higher, and my data is going to prove that today. Children who are close to their parents do better in their exams. I'm going to be showing they go on to get better jobs. They're more likely to have a higher hourly income at the age of 25. Having a stable, loving home, whatever form that takes, is linked with children's future success. It's one of the key parts of our report. Their happiness and their ability to form healthy and happy relationships. So that's why we need to celebrate, understand and invest in families. And if we get family right, it has a wider impact on our lives. Children are happier and more successful if they're happier at home. This review recognises the importance of family and sheds new light on what modern family life is. It's a significant piece of work grounded in family voice, featuring several new and significant findings. I started with a massive, comprehensive literature review on family life and a call for evidence. The literature review covers all the open databases of the longitudinal studies. We got a huge response to the literature review. I also carried out a series of roundtables, focus groups, interviews to hear directly from families in all their forms and from every corner of the country. To fill in the gaps in the evidence, even in those fantastic longitudinal studies, we've commissioned 2 nationally representative surveys of family life and family services and conducted additional data analysis. You can now see why I thanked my team, who have had a very busy summer completing this quickly. So what have we found? There are 8.2 million families with children in the UK. 63% of these families were married couples with children. 14% were cohabiting, 23% are headed by a lone parent. 10% of families are blended families, and in terms of size, 42% of families have 1 child, 42% have 2 children, and 15% have 3 or more children. Now, our analysis also reveals how this changes by ethnicity, religious affiliation, socioeconomic class, and local area, and the regional disparities are really quite marked in some of these areas. For example, the share of families headed by single parents varies from 10% in the highest socioeconomic group to 28% in the lowest socioeconomic group. The share of births to lone mothers ranged from 5% in the Cotswolds to 31% in Knowsley. There is huge regional disparity. And one of the reasons I'm so passionate about this is I come from Scunthorpe, which is one of those places with very high births to lone mothers. So I wanted to look very, very closely at it indeed. Research shows we can explain about half of the differences in the share of births to lone mothers across local areas by the difference in unemployment rates, being economically inactive, and education levels. You know, as someone who comes from Scunthorpe, that speaks to me about the need for good jobs, great education, and investment into these areas. The share of families with 3 or more children varies from 14% white British families to 41% of Pakistani families and 38% in Bangladeshi families. So that gives you something of the changes in composition. And indeed, family structure has changed gradually over time. We've looked at the past 20 years. So family structure has changed over the last 20 years. There are slightly fewer married couples. There are more couples cohabiting. There are fewer traditional nuclear family units today. 44% of children born at the start of the century were not in a nuclear family with both their biological parents for their full childhood, compared to 21% of children born in 1970. That's an interesting stat for me, showing something about the dynamic nature and change in family life. Over 80,000 children are in care, and many more in less formal arrangements. And it is so hard to find how many. The data, it does not show us how many children are receiving fantastic kinship care from family members who have really stepped in. The data doesn't show us how many children are living across families. But what I'm telling you now is hinting that actually we have a far more diverse setup in terms of family life than we quite realised. Many of us know that from our on-the-ground working, but I think that we're starting to think about how we can ask government to collect data to really show that, so we can meet the needs of young carers, of kinship carers, of the family members who are stepping in, and the people who, you know, that children and adults, parents have told me they call family, you know, the auntie or uncle who are the close friend down the road. It's a very, very diverse picture. It's dynamic, and we need to find new ways to stay up to date with how family's changing so we can support it effectively. But one of the most interesting findings is the percentage of families, as I said, who are lone parents, that hasn't changed that much in the past 20 years. So as I said, lone parents make up 23% of families with children in the UK. Now, when I explored this, I found that the UK is a bit of an anomaly. The rate of lone parents in the UK is higher than most of the rest of Europe, where it's about 13%, apart from, strangely, Latvia, Denmark and Lithuania, who are similar to us. It's clear that in the UK, life can be more difficult for lone parent families. And one of the things our research has shown is that lone parents are more likely to experience financial difficulties for obvious resource reasons that I've just outlined. In 2020, 49% of children living in lone parent families were in relative poverty after housing costs, compared with 25% of children living in married or cohabiting families. The reasons are understandable, with the rising cost of living and childcare costs creating challenging environments for lone parents. We must look at how we can support these parents when addressing some of these issues moving forward. And as I said, I'm not an economist, I'm an educationalist, but coming from an area like Scunthorpe, I've experienced firsthand how, you know, I moved to London when I was 18. I've experienced firsthand what regional disparity means in practice, what inequality of opportunity means on a personal level, what happens when ambition locally isn't matched nationally. I've seen the difference a relentless focus and investment can make, how great public services matched by a thriving economy and good jobs can really change people's lives. We need that everywhere. If we do this, we can really support the families that need it most. So alongside this, another thing that I brought into our research is how the pandemic's affected everybody's lives. And in fact, you know, we've heard a lot of the detrimental effects, but it's quite good to be able to speak about some actual positive outcomes. I think the pandemic reinforced the importance of family to many adults and children. It also provided an opportunity to reset relationships within the family. 25% of parents told us that their relationships with their children improved during the COVID lockdown. Families who felt they spent enough time together were happier with their family relationships. And younger children, we did the largest ever survey of 4 to 5 year olds who most enjoyed playing with their family, were happier with their life overall. The amount of time fathers spent on unpaid childcare, unsurprisingly, almost doubled from 47 minutes in 2014 to 15 to 90 minutes a day. And it has fallen back to 56 minutes, still higher than pre-pandemic. So I was pleased to see that. And I'm still exploring how children and families have been more broadly affected by the pandemic. There's an inquiry going on, but it's undoubtedly true there that some vulnerabilities have been exacerbated. Now, with all those, with that picture, that complex picture of family life now in mind, let's see what families said about themselves. So despite the changes during pandemic and families coming in different formations and sizes, what I want to recognise today is there was one thing, and this was across our quant work, our qual work, our literature review, there was one thing that unified all families, irrespective of ethnicity, gender, age, family makeup. The most frequently used word to describe family by families was love. And they all recognised that family had a protective effect. It insulates us from life's adversity, and every child, even if they can't live with their own families, should be able to experience it. This review has shown for the first time ever, I think, that family has a protective effect. We've really looked into the data to explore what that means. These core protective elements of family are love, strong and enduring relationships, the ability to depend on one another for emotional and practical support, and shared experiences. Time and time again, parents and children told us that these core elements give rise to an incredibly powerful effect, which underpinned their confidence. To speak this through in more detail, I think it's more about the quality of family relationships, actually, than family composition. And that's how families spoke to us. Our research shows that across all income levels, your ability to rely on family a lot in time of crisis is associated with significantly higher overall well-being. Our research also shows that close relationships between children and their parents are associated with better outcomes for children, from early years foundation stage scores to better GCSE scores, even to wages in young adulthood. And our research shows this protective effect can change over time, as I said, as family dynamics change. Of those who reported they could not rely on their family, less than a quarter were in this position 3 years later and 9 years later. So the picture changes over time. Of course, let's make no mistake, some families have had and will have more to battle against. Some will require support and some statutory intervention to keep children safe. And that is, we must not ignore that point. And as Children's Commissioner with a statutory duty towards children who are in care, I want every single child to grow up in a family, even if that cannot be their biological one, and where living with their birth family is not in their best interest. And we must, safeguarding children has to be at the centre here. And I've heard from so many children who love and care for their adoptive, foster and kinship family, is absolutely central to their lives. And I want that especially for all of those who need it the most. And while there are things like domestic abuse or child abuse that undermine the protective effect of family that I've been talking about, we must design and deliver a system that provides an equally insulating alternative for those children. There are times, though, where with some additional support earlier, we can keep families together. And sometimes that will be helpful for mum, sometimes for the child, sometimes for the wider family. So, where do families turn when they need support? And to who? Perhaps unsurprisingly, given all that I've spoken about today, families have told us that they choose to access protection and support from their own networks, parents, grandparents, family, and indeed some close friends. 78% of parents' preference is for the advice and support of family. And I heard time and time again the importance of peer support, families supporting families, the value of being able to share experiences with those in similar circumstances. 51% of parents told me they would then turn to their friends for advice. And when family and friends support networks are not enough, families want services that are accessible and don't stigmatise. They want to be able to form trusted relationships with professionals. Professionals want that too, that have longevity and the longevity required to see them through. They want that support to be compassionate, to be flexible, and to be trusting. And I've heard many examples, and from many of you in the room and many people online have given us those examples and shared their own examples of excellent service provision that has helped families through challenging times, from toddler groups to support groups to family hubs in community settings, in state-run settings. But I've also heard troubling cases where families couldn't access services, or services had, in the eyes of parents, let them down in their time of need. My own helpline, Help at Hand, supported nearly 1,000 children directly last year to unlock additional support for those where the system felt like it was working against them rather than for them. These were acute cases of children with additional needs, needing wraparound support that just wasn't available, and those with disabilities particularly not being able to access the respite care, and their families not being able to access the respite care that they so needed. A common theme was large regional variation of the availability and access to services. For example, while 94% of babies in London receive the first cheque they're entitled to as part of the Healthy Child programme, only 77% of those in the southwest receive this cheque. Our survey found that while 35% of parents in London had been to a playgroup in the last year with a child under 5, only 19% of those in the West Midlands had. So that wide variation is coming up again and again. And if we want these services to work for families, we need to think about them in the context of what families want and need and who forms the family unit. And I want decision makers and implementers to understand families' needs, to understand what families mean when they say they want services to meet, to feel familial, to feel local, to feel relationship-based. This is a mission of mine over the coming months, and I hope you'll join me in it. And many of you are on that mission anyway. So children tell me family is everything. Parents, literally, when I ask them, tell me family is everything. So now we must all give family the same primacy and priority that they give themselves. Part of this is about not being afraid to talk about family, about love, about relationships. Another part is more practical. And that's why one of the things I'm going to be doing is revising the government's family test to make it fit for purpose, positive, to reflect how children and families see themselves, so that everyone across government has a common framework to design and deliver policy that works for families, not as a checklist at the end, but as a thought at the start of making policy and designing what we do. Policymakers need to understand how families see themselves, and I want data on family to reflect genuinely how families are formed and not just think in a binary way about households. I want us to be confident when we speak about families, not to be squeamish, but instead to recognise the fundamental role that families play. Now is the time to change gear. Being a parent, and I'm sure I'll get many nods on this, is a responsibility you cannot carry out in half measure. I've been inspired by the amazing stories of those doing it well, but we have so much to do to ensure that this is a reality for all children. For most, that will be at home with their birth parents, but it must equally be true for those where it's someone else other than birth parents caring for them. Investing in family is the single greatest investment you can make. If we do it right, it's a self-sustaining unit. It's there to catch us when we fall. And if you're part of a strong family, you cast your net wide to catch others as well. So to finish, I'm calling on everyone. I'm calling on the new government and the new Prime Minister, when they are appointed, to put family centre stage, at the very centre stage of their agenda. If we get this right at a critical moment for families across the country, we will benefit generations to come, and we will change children's lives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, and I'm going to stay seated for this so that if Rachel wants to bat anything in my direction, you're very, very welcome.
I'm going to give her the hard questions.
But you have chosen absolutely the best moment to be making the case for family. Just as we have the debate in the Conservative Party about who the next leader is going to be, they'll be thinking about the policies with which they want to define their government. So congratulations on getting your report published ahead of the announcement. Now, I am going to ask anyone to put their hands up to ask questions. We'll also have some online. Please, when you ask your question, do introduce yourself and say who you are. So I'm going to take a couple from the floor and then I'll take one online. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Lord Farmer, Conservative backbencher. First of all, may I congratulate Dame Rachel. I mean, it was just the ticket, actually, and I think you're absolutely right. It's timed very well. Just your last point about getting government shifted here. When we've gone along there and said that we want policies to strengthen families in every government department, the answer has come back often from the top policy advisor, well, you know, we have to look after minorities. And that's been the sort of pushback, that's been the squeamishness, if you like. What I'm looking at is we have a minister for equalities, but we don't have a cabinet minister for families who can coordinate strengthening family policies through every government department, which can sort of show itself in a family hub, for instance, where the departments are working with one another to help the families. So can we sort of push that immediately with whoever the new Prime Minister is, that we have a cabinet level minister to strengthen families, coordinating through every government department?
Brilliant question, Rachel.
So, I mean, just Lord Farmer on that one, first of all, can I just congratulate you on the relentless work that you've done on bringing about family hubs and your absolute commitment to work for the family. It's you know, and I'm very well aware of it, yours and Samantha's work on that. In terms of, I want more than that, actually, Lord Farmer. I want the Prime Minister to be the Prime Minister who puts families at the centre, and I want every Cabinet Minister to be thinking about families and every policy to be thinking about families. And in fact, given the dire predictions of the winter we're going to have and you know what we're all going to face, I think it's good sense to actually be thinking about how to support families best in ways that they actually form themselves and can be meaningful. So whilst, you know, I think your ambition for a families ministry is a good one, I actually want every minister to be a families minister. I want the new Prime Minister to be Prime Minister of families, because that's the most important thing in the lives. It's everything. That's what adults told me, and children.
Thank you. Catherine.
Thank you very much. Dame Rachel, in your report there's a sentence from a little girl who says, "Family is mummy. She looks after me, and I know she loves me even if my dad does not. I don't need my dad, I just need my mummy because she's the best." That's both utterly heartwarming and utterly heartbreaking. What can you do to persuade absent fathers to pick up their responsibilities? At one point, in your opening remarks, you talked about not being stigmatising. Perhaps there needs to be a bit more stigma. How are you going to encourage men to step up?
Thank you. And please don't forget to introduce yourself, Catherine, if you would.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, you said Catherine, so I thought you had.
Yeah.
Catherine Pepinster.
Catherine, thanks for the challenging question. And you know, I think I was heartened in our research to see fathers spending far more time with their children, and that obviously reflecting in happiness, and also so many fathers saying that family was absolutely everything. I think the CSJ has done some superb work on how we can involve and bring fathers really closely into engagement with their children, right from antenatal classes right the way through. And I know I don't need to rehearse all that. I haven't got time to rehearse all that here, but there has been some superb pilots done by the CSJ on supporting dads to be dads and showing them how to do that, particularly dads that perhaps otherwise might have been absent. So building that confidence and getting them to engage and giving them the confidence of fatherhood as well as the responsibilities. And yeah, I mean, absolutely, child has two parents and we want that to work, don't we?
Great. I'm going to ask Hannah Pittaway, who's online from the Criminal Justice Alliance, if she'd like to ask a question.
Yes, thanks
Hannah?
everyone. Hopefully you can hear me okay. So congratulations firstly to Dame Rachel and her office for producing these findings. Many of Criminal Justice Alliance members support children whose parents are in prison, and we welcome the acknowledgement of the particular vulnerabilities and disadvantages of these children in the Part 1 report and Dame Rachel's commitment to further research and policy work in this area. However, for us, from existing research and experience of our members, we already know that there are no statutory bodies responsible for protecting the rights of children with parents in prison. These children often fall between the gaps between government departments, and we know better join-up policy and data is already needed. So will Part 2 of the family review include children of prisoners? And if not, why not?
Yeah, Hannah, thanks so much for that. And I've been following your campaigns and we've been talking to your office. I think it is a particular issue, particularly in schools, where, you know, often children whose parents are in prison are often not known, their situation is not known. I think the data, we need to ensure we've got far better data and indeed data sharing, you know, in a proper confidential way to ensure that those children are supported properly and there's policy for them. It's a far larger number than people realise, isn't it? It will be part of our the next stage of our review, and we've really welcomed and will welcome the input of you and other professional bodies supporting children with parents in prison.
Okay. Another couple of questions from the floor. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Very good to see you, Ruth. You were last in front of me, I
Oh my
think,
goodness.
in the North of England conference.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Many years ago. Sorry, Chris Waterman. I founded Investors in Families in England, and I now am secretary of the all-party parliamentary group for the teaching profession and for pedagogy, curriculum and accountability. Sorry about that. With reference to the last question, Park Prison in Wales is outstanding. It has a families unit where people in the last year of their long sentence get extra family visits, and social workers and mums and children do parents' evenings in prison. Fantastic. So the real point I wanted to make is I am absolutely delighted to see anything that comes from anybody with family as the first word in the title. It's unfortunate that a certain Michael Gove abandoned the Department for Children, Schools and Families, and I agree that every minister should be a minister for families. But unless we get a cabinet committee, it's a bit like saying every teacher is a teacher of English. We really need a cabinet committee which, according to the government, binds the government across government. Comments?
So I think you like Lord Farmer, you make a compelling case for ensuring that family is embedded in the way, the way this government works. I can see a number of ways it could be done, but I absolutely support the intention to get families absolutely embedded in the thinking of the new government and the new cabinet, whether that's through parliamentary committees, whether that's through ministerial posts. I still think I want responsibility sitting at the highest level.
Absolutely. Yes, gentlemen, just behind. Yes.
Oh,
yes.
thank you. Yes, I used to work in education. I have a playground voice. John Bald, I write for Conservative Home, and I am working with a number of families at the moment, and two of them are giving me grave concern. One is a lone parent with unstable work. The other is a family where the mother is disabled and the father has lost a high-paid job and has a minimum wage job. They are at present, he's riding a bike to work to save money for the wife's hospital appointments. When they came to see me, I had to send them the money for the petrol in advance because they couldn't afford to buy it and have me reimburse them. These families are in grave danger of going under this winter unless something urgent is done, and I'd like to know what might be done.
Yeah, it's the cost of living crisis, Rachel, must be a huge issue on your mind and on the mind of families at the moment.
I mean, we're certainly in the research we did, which was just, it was just over a month ago, so I think we probably get even stronger answers. Cost of living and childcare came up as the two biggest issues, but we did find that parents with children as opposed to parents without children were even more concerned about it. And we know that larger families and lone parents, obvious resource issues, there's a particular concern. Look, I have no doubt, I cannot speak for whoever, you know, the new government, but I think the messages are loud and clear about concerns around cost of living, particularly with rising utility bills and the issues, many issues that are the external world issues that are piling in on us. I particularly, you've picked on there, you talked about families with children with disabilities or families with disabilities. I think also kinship carers are a particular concern of mine. I think young carers as well. And there are particular groups that are often obscure in the data that I think are really deserving of a rethink and support, because it's these are clearly going to be difficult times.
If I may, Rachel, one of the issues that came out in your findings, which I find really interesting, was the importance of affordable childcare and availability of childcare. So Policy Research just last month published a report on childcare. We have one of the most expensive regimes in the developed world, and yet hardly any childcare available for parents who want it in the way that they want to use it. I mean, is this something you think the government should be dealing with? So
certainly childcare came up as one of the major concerns. When I was out visiting, part of my visits, we visited families in all manner of circumstances, and we went to schools, talked to children, and met parents at the school gate. I have to say it was the teachers who chased me down to the school gate about affordable childcare. It's clearly something that's on everybody's mind, and it's a genuine issue. And I think your report certainly suggested some ways forward, but it is a national concern, isn't it?
Okay.
I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah.
If there's anything you wanted to put in from your report.
Oh, well, we might respond to your findings, suggesting some ways in which childcare could be made more affordable. But I just wanted to take Emma Bowman from Barnardo's, Director of Children's Services, to ask her question.
Thank you. Appreciate that and the opportunity to speak. And thank you for the report. Just to share, so I'm a Director of Children's Services currently with Barnardo's. I've worked with Barnardo's for the last 15 years. I came to work for the charity because of our work with families. So it's really heartening to see and hear this focus on families recently as a result of the report. So thank you for the focus on the report. I wanted to ask a question with regards the voice and influence of children and young people. And you spoke earlier with connection to the inequalities that children and families are experiencing across England. A lot of that, of course, now will be exacerbated further by the poverty that many families are experiencing now and into the coming year. I would like to ask, what's the view of ensuring that children and young people's voices will influence further decisions and further development of this work as we go into families? I'm very conscious that often it is viewed through a very adult lens, and we want to champion the voice of children and young people as this develops, as they will be those that are experiencing the current delivery and developments for families and those into the future. So how will we ensure that children and young people's voices are at the forefront of developments?
So absolutely fantastic question, Emma. And you know, Children's Commissioner's Office works very closely with Bernardo's, and you know, we really value the work you do. Obviously, the first thing I did, coming from exactly the place you're coming, is how children's voices can influence government policy makers, deliverers of services, was do the Big Ask survey. So we did the largest survey ever of children, and managed to amplify their voices. And those voices told us, you know, in a unique way, what the concerns of children are. And they're often quite different to what you expect. So we found that an incredibly valuable process. I think government found it a valuable process. What I would say is how well government, parliament, policymakers have engaged with those voices, and listened and been interested and examined our database and asked questions of it. And I think we've started something there, and Bernardo's and other charities, NSPCC, I can see Quorum at the back, are doing amazing work on voice and children's voice. We're going to continue doing it. We're about to, as we finish today, I'm about to launch my call for action in all schools, asking children actually what their summer holiday was like and what they did and who they spent their time with, and about those practical things. And we will continue to feed through the experience of children to government, to policymakers. You will too. I think it's a powerful voice, and it's a way, it's a unique way to ensure that those in power do listen, because I've never yet found a politician, parliamentarian, or public service leader who doesn't care about what children think and children's experience. So we must harness that and keep that going. And I mean, you know, great work from all the charities doing that too.
We have lots of questions.
Sorry, I'll speed up.
No, I'm going to take a few more before we have to unfortunately wind up. Yes, lady in the third row.
Thank you. My name's Alison Morton. I'm the Executive Director at the Institute of Health Visiting. Thank you to Dame Rachel for your presentation. I was delighted to see two main points that you made. So the first one was that when families are struggling, after friends and family, the place they turn to for support is the health service. So obviously we represent health visiting. And the other point that you made was that families aren't getting the support that they need because the service is struggling. So health visiting is currently a third less health visitors than they were in 2015, and the impact of that is less time for families to get the support that they need. But just picking up your other point, my main question is about babies. So we're here to advocate for babies who don't have a voice. They rely on the adults around them to advocate for them. Most of the time that is their parents, but for some babies, and we've had tragic cases recently, Star Hobson and others, who needed an adult to be their voice, and they're citizens in their own right. And I just wondered what your plans were to really amplify the voice of babies who really do need a workforce like health visiting, with no stigma, to get alongside families, preventing problems happening in the first place, identifying vulnerable children. They're not standing up with a placard saying, I'm vulnerable. You know, they need somebody to go and find them.
So Alison, first, I mean, you are a heroine of health visiting and a heroine for babies. Everywhere I go, you're there, advocating for babies, and that's and children. That's that work and health visiting. That's super. But you know, my office support that in all our conversations, and we'll continue to do so. And you know, the work around the first 1,001 days has been some of the most impressive work of really lobbying on behalf of babies and young children, and we will support and continue that work.
Excellent, thank you. If I could take the lady on the end of the second row.
Hi there, Hannah Craft from PLMR Communications. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. One of the things that's kind of rocked me the most is how a healthy family is such a determiner of future success, even perhaps more so than education, which makes perfect sense. We represent a lot of education clients, and I'd love to know if we had family at the centre of our education policy, what might that look like? What would our system look like?
Yeah, so I mean, I've given this quite a bit of thought as a former head teacher and someone who's run a trust and been in teaching, and also worked in particularly in disadvantaged areas with an absolute passionate commitment to making sure children in disadvantaged areas get the best possible education that they're absolutely entitled to, and the passport that can be. I've been doing a lot of work looking at models of really getting services and service providers around the school. We need our teachers teaching. I'm very keen on the extended day. I'm very keen on bringing family hubs and using the school sites, because there's an obvious capital benefit there of ensuring that school sites can be opened up for family hubs and for these wider services. Teachers been able to get on with teaching, but actually been able to use the school site to both provide services. And I think it seems to me, I mean, we've seen Reach Feltham, for example, manage that kind of cradle to career model so powerfully. Where a prospective mum would go for her NCT classes to the school site, be taking her children to nursery there, and be getting children getting advice about careers and engagement with business later on. Now, they've worked hard on that. I think there's really something to be developed. And why I say that is the pandemic really showed us two things, I think. One, how trusted schools are by the community, and what a fantastic job schools and the LAs and trust that they're in did in terms of on the ground supporting their community. So I think we're actually ripe for a sort of rethink there. Now, of course, the core role of schools is education and delivery of the curriculum, and in the extended day we want all those activities happening. But I'm very keen on looking at how we can bring the services that are needed to the school. A great example of that, I was up in Birmingham Children's Hospital recently, a great model of a children's hospital, and the consultants for asthma had realised that they couldn't get their children and families into the hospital to check and support them. So the consultants and doctors were going out into the community, and the best place they chose to do, the place that worked for that was school, because I think what we've heard from parents is they want support where they trust, there are other adults they trust. It's a trusted service deliverer, and I have to say that I think schools have really proved their place as that key trusted place. But it's not necessarily about schools doing it, but I think those school sites could be used to do so much more.
If I could just follow up on that, Rachel. There's always been a big debate about the role of a school versus the role of an academy trust or a multi-academy trust with multiple schools. Now that the local authority is less and less part of the sort of school ecosystem, how important do you think it is for schools to work as part of a family of schools? Is that part of your vision? You speak as a head teacher and a CEO of a multi-academy trust.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I certainly wouldn't rule LAs out the picture. Yeah. I mean, I think LAs are playing a very strong part convening those families of schools as well. So I think there's really better, stronger partnerships there between multi-academy trusts and LAs actually starting to be formed now. But I do think the family of school model brings a new model to be able to do some of these things. Whether it's the delivery of special educational needs services in terms of specialist provision in schools, alternative provision, whether it's working with the LA to then deliver mental health support services through schools. But that the holding, what's happening now, a trust like mine, you would hold the budget of a large group of schools, and therefore be able to make decisions about what your children needed best in that area, and not only for yourself, for the other families of schools as well. So I can see, and I'm seeing a really positive ecosystem developing where we're sort of reshaping what the role of the trust is, what the role of the LA is, but what we're all saying is local, working together, partnership, sharing of resources, planning and mapping is what's going to deliver.
Thank you very much for that. So I'm only going to take, I'm afraid, a couple more questions. The lady in the very front row first, and then I'll take the gentleman at the end there.
Dame Christine Ryan, currently chair of Ofsted. But I have a sort of more general systemic question for you, Rachel. You've made a very powerful case for supporting families, supporting children, and that there are, for some families, very many different services need to be part of that support. We've heard about the good work that family hubs do and so on. But I see two obstacles that sadly rear their heads time and again when people try and provide a coordinated and integrated support, and that is siloed budgets and a block in terms of data and information sharing. And we hear it time and again when there are serious case reviews, when things go wrong. We get these two things emerging time and again as being major obstacles that have prevented proper and timely intervention. Are you hopeful, or can you urge perhaps someone in government to think carefully about looking at those two things and the impact it has on closing the gap between desire and policy and what actually happens on the ground?
Dame Christine Ryan hits the nail on the head as always. Thank you. That's a tremendous question. What we have been doing careful work on data sharing. We know on so many levels we don't want children telling their story multiple times. We need providers of services from different services to know and share. In my work on attendance, one of my deep frustrations was that police couldn't talk to health, couldn't talk to education, we couldn't track children across. I'm for a unique child identifier. My team are working with service providers, government, policymakers, slowly and painstakingly, and the ICO, and those responsible for GDPR legislation, etc., to try to unpick this and ensure that a really good data sharing model can be set up, can be made to work, and can be shared. That's absolutely number one. It's one of those technocratic things. If you look at the end of our report, we've got a list of things that need to be done and that we're doing in our part 2, and that's one of them, but not on our own. We all have to do it together. Secondly, on the money, I can only agree with you. My radical proposition was that the money should follow the child, and that's the way we'd sort it out. But there are people probably better placed to to understand how that could work. But yeah, you're absolutely right. And it is something that we raise. On the data sharing, I'm hopeful. I think we can get there.
Excellent. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks very much. Thanks. My name's James Farrant, and I'm going to speak as a father, if I may. I realise I represent the minority because I've got 4 children, and they're quite young.
You've got lots.
But thank you very much for all you're doing to protect children. Really, really appreciate it, and the report you've just gone over. I want to just press you on a point of parental rights. As an important point, I think, in that loving, stable family relationship. There seems to be a general or kind of, shall I put it, quiet erosion of some of those parental rights, particularly affecting younger children. I want to focus on children that are 5, 6, 7. And I know you're doing other reviews that affect what children are studying at school and the voice of the parent as to what's age appropriate and how that ties in. And I'd like to urge you, if I may, to give particular focus on the rights of parents and what is age appropriate and the provision that might be made for that. Is that okay?
So, I can only strongly support the primacy of parents. And I think the things I've said about, serious safeguarding concerns and things like that, let's take that. That's a minority of serious cases that we always need to. But other than that, we parents are children's first teachers. Parents are, of course, have to have primacy. And it'd be really interesting to talk about the RSE review work we're going to do, because lots of parents are talking to me about really wanting to be involved in what their children learn about relationships and adult life. So thank you for your question.
Great. I'm going to have to call it a day here. So I would just like to say, Dame Rachel, thank you so much for both delivering your keynote speech here at Policy Exchange today and engaging in a fantastic discussion with the people here and online. And thank you all too for really thought-provoking questions. I do think this is a very, very fruitful area. Policy Exchange have decided to make this a priority as part of their work going forward. We published 2 reports recently, one on childcare that I mentioned earlier, another on family taxation, taking the family as the unit of taxation as it is currently done in the benefit system. We hope to publish more in this area in the future, and we hope to work very closely too with the Children's Commissioner Office, with yourself, as we go forward. So thank you very much for joining us today. I wish you all the best for taking these thoughts and this agenda right into the centre of the next government.
Let's do it.
Thank you.
Thank you.